მოგესალმებით, დღეს ჩვენი სტუმარია ხალბატონი ჯული პეტერსონი, ეკონომიკის განვითარების სპეციალისტი. სხვადასხვა დროს ჯული პეტერსონი მუშაობდა მსოფლიო ბანკისა და USAID-ისთვის აფრიკაში, კერძოდ სამხრეთ აფრიკის რესპუბლიკაში და კენიაში ადგილობრივი თემების ეკონომიკურ განვითარებაზე. 2016-21 წლებში ის მუშაობდა საქართველოსთვის, ღვინის ეროვნული სააგენტოსთვის, მისი კონტრაქტორი კომპანიის მეშვეობით, რომელსაც ქვია Marq და ის უკეთებდა პოპულარიზაციას ქართულ ღვინოს ამერიკულ ბაზარზე. ცხადია, დღეს ვისაუბრებთ ამ საკითხებზე, რა გზა გაიარა ქართულმა ღვინომ ამერიკის ბაზარზე და სად ვართ დღეს. Ms. Peterson, thank you for your time. First of all, it will be very interesting for our audience, for the winemakers and the wine lovers in Georgia to listen to our discussion. You as an economic development specialist have an impressive background in agricultural sector. You have worked in different countries like in Kenya, in South Africa, on empowering the local communities. Tell me more about your professional background in this field and what kind of personal touch you have with agricultural sector and empowering the people, the local communities.
I think I am a farmer's daughter first. I grew up in Iowa in the center of the US and in agricultural community. So I think it is in my roots and my blood. And I've always been drawn to that sector. The reason that I got into economic development is that I was introduced to microcredit financing. And when you can see the results of investment into small communities and you see the flourishment that happens when there's actual investment not at the local level and you see people's lives transform, that's a very powerful thing. And so I always continue to want to learn how to do that better, how to do it more, what is the best practices for that. So I think it is lifelong learning about how we really work together to build investment and what are the mechanisms that are needed to in order for people to flourish at local levels.
Tell me about Marq Energy. You are the founding partner and the executive of this company. What's the contribution Marq Energy has made in the economic development of different societies?
I started the firm in 2012, so not so long ago, but I did that because I wanted to do more of what we were already doing. We wanted to focus specifically in the wine sector and in the food sector that impacted agricultural communities. I came from a background of both doing foreign direct investment and export development. And after 2008, when the economy really changed and foreign direct investment and capital really dried up for a long time, and it's still building now. For many communities, when there's no economic growth, there's no additional job creation. So exporting is the #1 way to bring investment back into the community. So for me, I wanted to really focus in that area and focus on those two sectors. So I started the firm then to be able to really focus in those two areas. And we had been working in the wine industry since 2008. And when you start working in wine, something captures you. And for me, it brings all the pieces together from the agricultural roots to the impact it has in local and rural communities. And you get to work with this amazing product as well that is both science and art at the same time.
Can you remember how you and Marq Energy were connected with Georgia and Georgian wines? What were your first impressions? Can you tell about it?
Oh my goodness. In 2015, I had a friend in the industry in the US, and he came to Georgia for a wine economist conference. And he came back and he called me and he said, Julie, go to Georgia right now, drop everything and just go to Georgia. I'm like, what? You know, why? We had been working in for many European wine regions. So I started doing research. I called the Georgian embassy and I said, okay, this is the call I had. So I had a meeting at your embassy in Washington, D.C. They gave me some names at the National Wine Agency. And so I flew to Georgia. And I remember I came in on one of those 5 a.m. flights and I stayed at a hotel where I had just the doors open to get some air. And so I just slept for a couple of hours and then I was supposed to go to this wine fair that was happening downtown. And I remember I woke up and there was like, I thought there was bells ringing and polyphonic singing happening. I'm like, oh, is this the way it is every morning in Georgia? Like, what is this place? The sun was shining. So I walked down the hill and came to the first wine festival and started tasting some wines. And I just was immediately captured by how integrated grapes and wine are into the everyday life of Georgians. You know, we've been working in France and Italy for years, but there was just, this is the way that it's so culturally tied together here is just something unbelievable that I had never seen before. And most people who now we've brought here over the years, it is something they have never seen before either. It's a very, very special cultural part of fabric of life here that is different.
During the recent years, we are all observing how the image, the post-Soviet image or Soviet image of Georgian wines with the kind of cultural or marketing messages like Alazane Valley or semi-sweet reds or the label of Stalin is changing, probably not in each kind of wines, but mostly in the small case of small wineries, and how we are reshaping and transforming our image of Georgian wine as a label. Can you formulate in 3 words how the Georgian wine can be labeled nowadays a Georgian wine as you know it and as you represent in the US market?
I think it's really important to think about the US market not as one giant market, but a lot of segments in the market. The US market is the largest wine, you know, we're not the largest in population, but we are the highest in consumption in the US. And I think it's really important to think about segments in the US market. Before there were the small family wineries and more artisanal Qvevri wineries that were in the US. The only people who drank Georgian wine in the segment were people who had been introduced to Georgian wine either from one of the ex-Soviet countries, right? So either they were Russian-speaking communities or from another country and had been introduced to Georgian wine. So they were typically in those population groups in the US. That's where the wines were on the shelves in wine stores. When in 2012 was only the first year that Georgian Qvevri wine and natural wine was brought into the US. So it's relatively new to the US market, but it has taken the US market by storm. But those wines are for a completely different segment of the US market. And that segment of the US market is the one that is the most dynamic in the US right now. So when we started working with all the wineries, the ones that the market, because there's such dynamic action in the segment in the natural wine segment, this is where so many Georgian wines became very popular and buyers were looking for these wines, and it was very, very dynamic. Where the other segment, it was just the people who had always been, you know, consuming Georgian wine, just kept consuming, and that part didn't really grow, just because this segment of natural wine was so dynamic. And so Georgian wine now is at, you know, some of the top Michelin star restaurants and they are top wine bars. And so the natural wine segment just continues to be dynamic. And what's happening is it is transforming the fine wine segment as well and having an impact. So it's all working together to create this very dynamic marketplace for natural wines. And it just continues to grow and to grow and to grow. So it's super exciting to have Georgia not only to become a leader in that segment of the market.
What was the past Georgian wine past during the recent years, especially when you were working on promoting Georgian wines in the US? As for the results, like numbers, data, but also process as well, what kind of milestones did you overcome? Where are we now?
When we started, the Department of Agriculture asked us for very, very aggressive growth numbers. And we said it would take about 7 years to get to, if growing at the fastest point possible, it would take 7 years to reach 1 million bottles in the US. We got there in 5 years. So it went faster than we thought. And that was like the best case possible. So when we look at growth numbers, this segment was the fastest growing category in the US market for some time. Now I think that continues to be so. It's this category in particular is still growing. But what's really, I think right now the point we are in is that Georgia came new into the market and people wanted to try new Qvevri wines and they wanted this texture that is given from these wines. Were so interesting. Now they are competing with natural wine from all over the world, from France, from the US. A lot of people are making skin contact wines too, in eggs. A lot of people came here to buy Qvevri and are making Qvevri wines. So now we have this, now we have a situation where Georgian wines have this such incredible history and tradition and culture. Now you have these fine wines, or the natural wines, fine wines, are standing beside each other and competing with other winemakers as well. And Georgian wine has to continue to develop and be the highest quality level because you are standing shoulders to shoulders with all of the other best winemakers in the world who are competing to be in the best wine, in the most important wine bars in the US. So we have to continue to develop and to learn and just to get better and better every year because now everyone else is all these winemakers in every other part of the world are also doing that.
The biggest market for the natural wines from Georgia as well as from all the wine regions is the US market, right? And also we are at the festivals that are compromised where most of the winemakers have exported the first time in the United States. So we all started exporting the United States. So what is the sentiments, what is the values that Georgian wines touch most in the United States? Why Georgian natural wines are so popular now in the United States?
Oh, that's such a good question. I think Georgia has all the things, the history, the tradition, the culture, that many of the natural wines are made by the families. I mean, if you hit all the things that people really care about, Georgia hits them all. You're not just another winemaker in another part of the world that, okay, Qvevri wine is really popular, I'm gonna buy a Qvevri and start making wine and adopt the tradition. You are the center of that tradition, and people, it's touching all of those things. I think the other big piece is the Georgian people themselves. When people from the US come here, all the buyers and importers, Georgia has a way of transforming you. And you want this like courage and the strength of Georgian people, the hospitality, the warmth, all of it. You feel like you are part of the Georgian family when you come here. And I think that transforms people, and they also want to learn how to be, hospitality like Georgians, all of the things. So I think wine, not only is it world class, but it's also comes with everything from the heart of the Georgian people as well.
Who are the people who drinks Georgian wines in the US? Can you, in terms of like marketing point of view, tell me a few words about the hypothetical customer drinking Georgian wine?
Yeah.
Or customers, probably. There might be not one, right?
Yeah, the typical consumer for Georgian natural wine in the US are young people and people who are coming and wanting to not only experience something interesting, something natural, something that feels alive in the glass, but they also want to know where it's from. They want to know who the people are that made it. These are the consumers that really care about where it came from, who made it, and how it was made. And there are people exploring. So if you talk to most buyers in the US who are running natural wine bars or restaurants or retailers, they will say their customers come in and say, okay, what is interesting? What can I explore? And those people need to know, have the people running the wine bars, they have to know the whole story and know who the producers are. So these are people who really care about the impact. They also have money that they're willing to spend. You know, Georgian natural wine represents 1/3 of the exports to the US, but 2/3 of the value. They're willing to pay a lot to have, because they know it's made by someone in particular. It is not stirred up in a big batch somewhere and, you know, like have different sweetness levels to, you know, for the US customer, this is actually just grape juice in a bottle. And I think that's really, really important to people in this segment of the market, in the natural segment.
Now, what kind of stereotypes exist about Georgian wines outside Georgia? What have you heard about the Georgian wines? And more or less, which of them is closer to the real representation? Can you tell me about that?
The perception that consumers have when they are first introduced to Georgian wine, now typically they have heard that there's some orange wine, that Georgia makes orange wine. So they want to learn about it, and they're kind of get a little bit jumbled up, orange wine, amber wine, what is skin contact wine, what is natural wine, what is qvevri wine. So to them, orange wine is all of those things. They think they don't really understand why it's orange maybe. Now maybe over the last few years, that understanding, they start to understand. So the perception that most consumers have when they hear about Georgian wine now, or they read an article about Georgia, they meet somebody who has traveled here, they know that it's orange wine, because it's somehow we have this weird label now in the US that it's orange wine. But for them, I think the learning is about there's a difference between natural wine, qvevri wine, skin contact wine. And for Georgian wine, you know, many of them are, when there's no skin contact, this is new for them. They don't understand that there's different kinds of wine, a whole spectrum of wines that are made naturally in Georgia. And they don't understand that there are differences. Not everything that is made in qvevri is natural. Not everything that is, not every Georgian wine is amber. You know, so I think there's a whole spectrum of learning, and for them it's very, very exciting to know that there's like all these different styles are made naturally in Georgia.
What do you think the strategy to promote like one variety, like Saperavi, for instance, because we were promoting for a long time Saperavi as a kind of groundbreaking wine and varietal associated Georgian wine. Do you see this strategy as effective, or could we focus on more diversity of 525 varieties? Which one do you prefer, like most effective strategy to promote Georgian wines?
One of the most interesting moments for me when was in France, when the National Wine Agency brought all of the partners from all different countries to the same room, and we all talked about the dynamics in our market. And what was really interesting for me is to hear, you know, the people who are working with Georgian wine in Hong Kong, in Japan, in Korea, and in Poland, in London, all talking about which styles of Georgian wine were really growing and effective in their markets, which were kind of like the key ambassadors. And especially in China, in Poland, Saperavi was the thing that was the buyers and the consumers in those markets were really, really excited about. And so, you know, as someone who does business development, you say, okay, the levers, you know, the mechanisms and what people are buying from Georgia are different in different markets. In London, in Europe, in the US market, natural wines and more the amber and more of the, you know, non-skin contact or little skin contact, sparkling, dry. Those were the styles of wines that were really, that's what's growing in the US. That's the dynamic sectors of the growth of those markets. So yes, so it was really interesting to see why there's different markets for different styles, and there's room for everything. Particularly in the US, it's so big, everything is you know, can work in the US. But you have to get it into the right sector, and sometimes you have the cheerleaders out front, and those are the natural wines in that segment. What's interesting then is that it impacts all the other segments because people start hearing, why is everybody talking about Georgian wine? What is this Georgian wine? And if you're a big red wine drinker, you're like, okay, well, does Georgia make red wine too? Like, what are the red grapes from Georgia? And then that market starts to go as well, or that segment starts to go as well. So it really is, it's really diverse. So you don't really have one leader, but just like, you know, Italy and France, there's a whole diversity of different styles. Some go faster in the market just because that's what the consumers are interested in. And so for me, I think Georgia is really a huge diversity of styles, but there's no one, there's, in the US, in other countries, yes, in the US, Saperavi is not the one that is leading the way. It's growing now because we have a lot of red wine consumers, but there's other styles that are really the fast growth segments of the market.
What would be the preferences from the US market towards the low alcohol wines? Are they more coming?
The low alcohol segment of the market is at the beginning, and it's growing very, very, very fast. But I think what happens in the US is that you have young consumers that, or people that just want something light and fresh, and it's lower in alcohol. And when we say low, they call it low or no. You know, it's at 6-7%. It's pretty low.
It's pretty low.
The big, so when we're talking about alcohol levels, for a while in the US, in maybe 20 years ago, alcohol at like 14.5, 14, these got the highest scores. This is like what people thought were like important wines. And over the last 20 years, that has really changed. It continues to come down. So now everyone in California, everyone around the world is now making wines around 13.5, 13. Like that's where
it's
like
the climate change, right?
No, it's more people's preference. You know, you don't want to. Sometimes, yes, you do want something that big, but most times you want something that's a little bit easier to consume. So red wine is around 13, 13.5, you know, whites, ambers, 12.5, 12. And then you have the low, which is like 10 and under, really. And that category is really, really growing. But when you have that, people want those kinds of wines sometimes, but they also really enjoy then a 12.5 or something like a normal one. But that low calorie, or low alcohol is continuing to grow, but it's really hard to make a complex wine at that low alcohol level. But what we find is like people love those wines, and they love, you know, kind of like normal alcohol level wines as well. So now you kind of expand the number of consumers and the number of offering in that category.
I have heard sometimes from the different professionals, especially importers, that sometimes Georgian wines are really competing. The wines from European countries, for instance, are really competing with the prices towards Georgian wines. What do you think about that?
In the US market, typically, any time you have a bottle of wine, your ex-seller price, or your price that you would give to an importer, you have to take that price times 4, because it is the transportation, it is the importer, then the distributor, and then either the retailer or the restaurant. So let's just say your bottle of wine is $10 to make it easy. It means that it's $40 on the shelf in the US market. $40 isn't typically something that a lot of consumers consume on a Tuesday night. You know, that has to be a very special bottle. And what we say is look at who you're competing with against in the market. At $40, or let's say it's like $38, when you look at a shelf, or you can check online at different natural wine like online stores and say, okay, I'm competing, my wines are standing shoulder to shoulder with wines from France, from Italy, from all over the world at $40. Does my wine over deliver for that price point? And so I think there is room for every pricing in the market. One thing is, how much do you want to sell? If you want to sell more, maybe have your prices come down, but a little bit, but there's room for you. The most important thing is that your wine has to over deliver for the price point. So if you are selling, if your wine is placed on the shelf for $40, it better taste like a $60 wine. If you're selling at $30, it better taste like a $40 wine. You always want the impression that it's over delivering for the price point. And so I think it can work at any price point. So it's not about, is it too expensive or not? It's about, does your wine over deliver for whatever the price point is? And so it's really good to know where your wines stack up, how they compete against wines from not only from Georgia, but from other countries as well. So it's really important to, taste those wines and compare and say, is that really where my wine should be positioned in the market? But people who say, oh, it's too expensive, that's not really a valid conversation to have. It's more about the value that that wine is representing. So I don't think in general, Georgian wines are not too expensive if they are over delivering.
I'm sure the interview will be really interesting for the winemakers in Georgia. You as a mediator who is between the winemakers on the one hand, and I know that you have a great friendship between among the winemakers in Georgia, and on the other hand towards the importers who are representing Georgian wines in the US. What kind of the challenges winemakers face on the one hand and the importers on the other hand? I think it will be really interesting and helpful to articulate those challenges, and sometimes we don't have the channels or the platforms to articulate those challenges, right?
One of the most important things for importers is logistics. And when we first started bringing importers here, people wanted to import right away, but they weren't ready to take. When you start with typically a few pallets to start, and they were not filling up an entire container. Also, a container will only pick up from one place, so doing this kind of consolidation was very was prohibitive for a lot of importers to start. So they started telling me, okay, we want to start, but this is not, it's hard to figure out how to do the logistics without bringing an entire container. So I had one of the first importers, he also bought Georgian juice because he's trying to fill up a container to take. But others really said, you know, we will start when there's a better logistics solution. So we put together, you know, sublet up from a warehouse, and we have a logistics partner here on the ground to start to do this consolidation. And so we started doing these consolidated containers, which is really essential to be able to get importers to start. So now when we are talking to importers, they are all asking me, okay, we heard about this consolidation program that you are doing. How, you know, tell us about how that works. And I think that was one of the biggest barriers in the beginning, but now we have solved this in some way, and we continue to work to try to connect importers who are ready to do shipments out, and we are really working to get it on a much more consistent basis, going both to the East Coast and to the West Coast. So I think the logistics just took some time to work out for new importers to start.
I see. We are very closer to the Zero Compromise Natural Wine Festival now, and this interview is also led by Natural Wine Association. So, what do you think? What kind of the role play the wine events, the wine fairs like this, like Zero Compromise Natural Wine Festival and international festivals as well?
Zero Compromise is just this amazing fair, and I think it has been so key to introducing Georgian wine to a large and growing worldwide audience. I think it is the group that we have here now has kept asking, how long has this been going on? How long has this been going on? And now there is this tradition and this cycle that people know that it's in May every year and can start planning on it and know that they can bring their buyers here in early May every year. So I think this is very fundamental to continuing to build Georgian wine in all different countries. Now when we come, you know, every year I know that I will see, you know, the German importers are here, and there's buyers from London, and every year we are seeing the same groups that are growing every year too. So I think it's really important this is key to just continuing to build the leadership of Georgian wine in the natural wine community.
In the recent years, some of the grape growers in Georgia, and you know, in all of the regions of Georgia, there are a lot of grape growers because everyone is growing grapes, right, in Georgia. And some of them has managed to gain both cultural and market value and produce their own wines from their own vineyards. But we see that not all of them can do it, because of the limited resources and access towards especially financial resources, and also probably lacking the marketing knowledge, how to do it, how to sell the wines. Now, what do you think? What has to be done from them or from the other stakeholders, I don't know, to fulfill this, to convert those small projects into the commercial, the projects for their own wine consumption into the commercial projects, right?
In every country and in every wine region, there are always many more growers than there are actually people who are bottling their own wine, and this is fundamental to, as we were talking about before, economic development in communities. These growers are the backbone of entire wine regions, and typically we want, these people have to also make enough money to be able to continue to to grow really good quality grapes. And when in most countries, the drive to have people know and to continue to educate about how to grow really good grapes is really important, because you want to continue to raise the quality all the time. And so in other countries, the incentive is always for not the largest production, but the best quality grapes. And so they get incentivized by highest quality grapes, and they have this built in, so there's always a drive up in terms of quality, which is very, very important. And so it's a learning process. You want growers to also, not only winemakers, to continue to make excellent wine that can compete internationally, but also the growers have to be learning and growing and understanding what the highest quality grapes are, and what kind of grapes need to be grown to go in the bottles that are demanding higher price points. And so usually an incentive program is in place to go that way, because if you look out over the next 20 years for Georgian wine, quality of grapes have to continue to go up every year, and that is going to be the best way for overall economic development to happen, because Georgian wine is competing now internationally all over the world, and it has to continue to really develop and focus on quality grapes, not quantity.
It seems like a part of even Georgian citizens don't have enough information sometimes about the recent success of Georgian wines internationally. We all try to raise awareness about it, we write about it, we tell the stories in the interviews, but it seems like sometimes still it's not enough, even inside Georgia. And there are some people very skeptical towards the perspectives of Georgian wines internationally, and especially in the EU countries. What would you tell those people? What does the proof say about the success and the perspectives of Georgian wines in the United States, in EU and other countries?
The numbers speak for themselves. The US market, the natural wine category, is the most dynamic, and it is growing the fastest. Georgian wine is the fastest growing category within that segment of the market. So these wines are the #1 ambassador for Georgia. People want to know more. Where is this country? What's going on in this country? Why are they making these wines this way? How did they get here? All of these questions. So, Georgian wine is the ambassador, and this category, the natural wines, happens to be in the US, the segment where it's super, super dynamic. And so we want to just continue focusing in that segment, because it just continues to grow. And so I think that there's just incredible opportunity to continue to tell the stories, and the numbers are the results are the results. Like, the numbers show, the growth shows, the exporting, the interest that we have from buyers for this category, this is the evidence. So I sometimes think Georgians don't know that it is what an amazing success they are having in the US market. I don't think that everyone feels it or you can't see it, but in the US market, if you are a buyer in Portland, Oregon, or Los Angeles, California, or Chicago, or Texas, you see Georgian wine everywhere. And it is this incredible success story. So I think our job together as a community over the next few years is to continue to push down the barriers and logistics to make that easier, to continue to raise the quality, the education, the understanding of quality wines and who you're competing against in the US, and just continue to develop that quality. Because with that, the price point, what we try to do is get an average increase in price point over like a 10-year period of time of maybe 5 cents a year. So the perception is like, oh, a value is always increasing at the same time as the volume is going. This is the ideal situation. So we want to increase quality always while we're increasing the exports. I think what is happening and has happened over the last 10 years of Georgian wine and the exports to the US market, and now what I see coming in the next 10 years is just the greatest wine success story, I think, in the US market. And it is such a privilege to be part of that community. You know, we are a matchmaker, and we are one part of a much larger community of importers, of distributors, of buyers, of winemakers. And it takes all of us together as a community, as a village, with support, with financial support from the National Wine Agency and, you know, other possible funding as well, to continue to build that community. But in the next 10 years, you know, Georgia already is a huge success story in the US, and it will just continue to be so if we continue on this path.
Thank you for your time.
You're welcome.